Hi, everybody, and welcome to the ReelAbilities Film Festival 2020. A little bit of housekeeping. We want to thank our community partners and all of our industry sponsors, especially in this particular case for Fox Disney and all their help in getting this movie and getting our guests to come today. We also want to thank the Department on Disability for the City of Los Angeles, because without their tireless work, I wouldn't be sitting here right now about to do what I'm about to do. And so gratitude at this moment really doesn't begin to cover it. Okay, so let's move right on. And to you, Caroline, and to you, the audience, I wanted to read something just as a little intro, and then we're going to get into the talk, if that's okay. I could talk about fairy tales, the need for them in times of trouble, and how their magic and cruelty are instructive in explaining us to us. I could talk about Roy Orbison singing for the lonely, as Springsteen wrote, and how our guest has done the same with her work. I could talk to you about the history of horror and fantasy, and how this film walks a crooked line back to the Universal monsters and Browning's freaks in terms of empathy and disquiet. I could tell you about the trajectory of a single life affected by the arts, but especially by this uniquely American work of art, from darkness into sunlight. I could tell you how my father emphasized preparing for this day, and how my mother responded, "Joe, he's been preparing for this for 30 years." I could talk about the body of this artist's work, a temple built to the outcasts and the weirdos, and how she is our patron saint and high priestess. Most of all, though, I could talk to you about art as salvation, but doing so would only delay the glorious moment for the 10-year-old I once was to finally say to this singular artist, "Welcome, Caroline Thompson. It's nice to meet you."
Oh gosh, Michael, thank you for making me cry. I appreciate that right out of the box. Gosh, that was the most beautiful introduction I've ever received. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome to the ReelAbilities Film Festival. And as you're a writer and a filmmaker, but we're going to concentrate on the writing mostly today. We, of course, begin with an inciting incident. And I understand you grew up in Washington, D.C.?
That's correct, yep.
So was there a moment as a child where you saw a movie that affected you all the way to maybe even today? And coupled with that, is there a moment of disability? Because that's our audience, and they would like to know that, that you encountered as a child that still reverberates.
Well, I'm probably going to give you a very odd answer to the first one, and I'll have to think a little bit about the second question. So the first time I ever went to the movies at the movie theater was my brother's, I think, 6th or 7th birthday. I would have been 3 or 4 years old. And we were, of course, late for the movie and ran down the slanted aisle in the dark to the front row, and I got separated from my mom and my sister and my brother, and ended up sitting between 2 little boys who I had no idea who they were. And my greatest memory of sitting between them is that smell of stinky sneaker. And the movie, oh my God, I'm having such a brain fart. The movie was, The Time Machine, which absolutely terrified me. And I was pinned to the seat, eyes bigger than you can imagine, unable to breathe, unable to grab anybody's hand, absolutely terrified. The story seemed so real. The monster seemed so real. The images being in the front row of the theater were enormous and overwhelming. and the lights came up, still couldn't find my mom. We got out into the parking lot, and my sister proceeded to shut her hand in the car door. So that little drama took great precedence over the trauma I was feeling over this film. And I don't think I ever really got to express to my family how terrifying it was, except to say that I wouldn't go back to the movies. And I think that's actually really been a great benefit to me. So unlike lots of my friends like Tim and Danny Elfman, who went to the movies every Saturday to watch whatever monster movie was showing, whatever Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe film was on, I wouldn't go to the movies because I thought they were too overwhelming and too frightening. And I think it gave me a tremendous respect for the power of film and the power of film to rock people's world, because that film rocked my world. So that's kind of a roundabout answer. I mean, later on, I became very, very moved by, particularly The Swamp Thing was the movie that got me. I loved, and Frankenstein, of course, the sad outcast who just one glimpse of that outcast and people screaming moved me beyond explanation and beyond description. In terms of disability in my life as a small child, I had a cousin who today would have been diagnosed with autism, but at the time there were less fortunate words applied to his lack of ability to communicate, his OCD, his temper tantrums, and he was 6 years older than I was, and I was a very tiny child, and he seemed enormous to me and terrifying because you never knew what he was going to do next, and even more terrifying because I grew up in an environment where nobody spoke about anything. So no one said to me anything was wrong with him or different about him or required compensation. So he would come every summer, and I was fascinated by him. And I think he had a huge impact on me because I knew he couldn't communicate, and I would often step in and communicate for him. And he stirred something in me that has been stirred my whole life. But I think that was the initial eruption of feeling like I needed to step in and help express for those who can't express for themselves, including animals, which has been a huge love of my life and a huge influence on my work. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it actually made me think of one immediately. Is Edward in some ways on the spectrum?
Gosh, I never thought about it, but I suppose he is. I mean, he's essentially nonverbal. He's sensation. He's an expression of sensation more than he's an expression of anything else, sensation and emotion. I mean, as some of you may know, when Johnny Depp asked me about Edward and how to understand Edward, I said that he was based on my favorite dog, which he was. And I had this beautiful dog who was so expressive and so present and so eager to be involved that I often said that the only thing keeping her from participating was her physiognomy. And she inspired me a lot and moved me a lot. And so that's my greatest understanding of where Edward came from. But maybe, there's some of my cousin in there as well. I don't know.
All right. And so was there also an early moment for you where you knew, oh yeah, I write, and this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah. So I was in sixth grade, and I don't remember why we had the assignment to write short stories, but when I was growing up, the area of Georgetown in DC was a place where we loved to go on weekends. Girls parading up and down the street and shopping, I guess. And there was a blind flower vendor in Georgetown, and I couldn't stop thinking about him, so I wrote a story about him. And in my story, mind you, I was 12 years old. In my story, I wanted to tug at the heartstrings of my audience. And so the blind flower vendor in my story had a prized possession, which was his pocket watch, which he kept on a gold change in his vest. And in the story, somebody from across the street calls to him for flowers, and he steps into Wisconsin Avenue and is killed. And the last image in the story is his gold watch in the gutter left behind. And I had my classmates in tears. And I mean, I just get chills thinking about it, because knowing that I could impact people's emotions became, I guess, my first addiction. So from that moment forward, I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I really liked making people cry. Can't help it.
And so then where did you go after sixth grade in terms of the writing? We can jump ahead if you need to. But.
Well, I wrote a lot of short stories. I remember reading them to my high school, and by that point I loved to shock, and so I had a lot of curse words. So, and I went to these all girls schools, and so I remember one English teacher hustling the headmistress away from the assembly so she wouldn't hear me say, oh, sorry, that's my dog coughing. She wouldn't hear me say shit and words like that. So I just, I came to think of myself as a writer, which at a very young age, which was both a blessing and a curse. I mean, right now in my life, I'm basically retired, and I write every morning just for myself. And quite literally, that's the first time in my life I can remember doing that. And it's a beautiful thing to do. It's completely helped me fall in love with words again. And so I'm really grateful for that.
And you did go on to write a novel, and I understand the novel is what got Hollywood's attention initially?
Well, in so many words. I had moved to LA by that point. I really wanted to get away from the East Coast, which I found very stultifying. So I came out west to LA pretty immediately after college. And my first love was novels, and so I wrote one. And but by the time I finished the book and got it published, I started getting interested in the movie business, and I wasn't quite so scared of it as I had been as a 4-year-old at the time machine. And so I was lucky enough to be able to arrange for the book to be seen by a few directors. And my directors of choice were Brian De Palma, because I love Carrie, David Lynch, because Eraserhead and my book have some feelings in common, and Penelope Spheris, who had made a beautiful documentary called The Decline of Western Civilization, which I recommend if you've never seen it. And Penelope loved the book, and I made a deal with her that she could have an option on it for $1 if I could write the screenplay with her, because she was a writer. And that's what we did. The film never got made, but it introduced me to the business. And in fact, her agent loved the script so much that he asked to represent me, and he's still my agent 36 years later, which is almost unheard of in our business. So.
But Edward Scissorhands was your first produced screenplay.
That is correct. And my novel and Edward have a lot in common. They both are about extreme outsiders coping with the so-called normality of suburbia. And so in a sense, Edward was the next expression of a story that was very important to me to tell.
And so how did that initial seed get planted?
For Edward?
Mm-hmm.
So my agent and Tim Burton's agent were at the same agency, and Tim had just, I think he had just released Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I had published this novel, and my agent had the brainstorm that maybe we would be good to work together, Tim and I. And so he arranged for a lunch, and we met and immediately became the fastest of friends. So our lunch stretched into like a 5-hour walk on the beach, and we couldn't stop talking, and our sensibilities so meshed. And we knew we wanted to work together, and came up with, over the course of the next wee while, we came up with lots of ideas. And at one point, Tim told me about a drawing he had made in high school of a character who has scissors instead of hands. And I said, stop right there. That's it. There's the picture. I didn't see the picture at the time. He only told me about it. Hold it up a little bit higher, Michael. There you go. So yeah, you can see the hands. I knew exactly what to do with it. I knew how to tell my sort of horror fairy tale about suburbia, which my book had been one, and this could be another expression of it, immediately. So I said, stop, that's it, let's do it. And that was the one.
And he gave you, or you just took complete freedom with this. I mean, when we talk about Edward Scissorhands in the larger culture, everyone automatically says Tim Burton, but from what I understand, this was yours.
Yes, this was mine. I shared story credit with Tim because it never would have existed without the initiating sort of hilarious genius of the image. And I'll explain why I say hilarious genius in a second. But that was literally all I had to start with. And so, you're not the only person who misunderstands it. I mean, so many people thought basically that Tim had dictated the story to me and that I transcribed it, which couldn't be further from the truth. But that's fine. It doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is that it got made there and out into the world. And yes, so Tim and I said, stop, that's it. And I went home, and basically I was fundamentally still a prose writer at that time. And so I sort of spit out, for the first and only time in my life, it just sort of entire vision, unbidden, as it were, it just came right to me, of this story. So, about, I don't know how many pages of prose, probably something like 70 pages of prose. And the story fundamentally remained unchanged from thenceforward. And
how did you then go taking the prose and turning it into a 120 page or 105 page?
113.
113.
Yeah, that used to be my magic number for screenplays, and I guess that started because of Edward. Well, I'm a very visual writer anyway, so my prose pages were fundamentally visual. And I just sort of heard the dialogue in my head. Plus, I can't remember when I made this list, whether it was to write that quick prose version or if this was 30 years ago, plus actually 34 years ago. I had a list that I made of the things that one does with one's hands and the things you can't do if you don't have hands that are conventional. So if you have scissors for hands, there's a lot of things you can't do. And if you have scissors for hands, there's lots of things you can do. So for example, you can turn a bush into a topiary if you have scissors for hands, but you can't go and shake hands with somebody as much as you might want to. So I made that list, and it sounds kind of stupid, but I mean, I kind of wanted to make sure that I hit all the joys and all the fears and all the sadnesses of what he could and could not do.
Well, far from being stupid or sad, I want to sort of underline that bit of process, because one of the things that we talk about, and I'm on the Writers with Disabilities committee at the Writers Guild, so this is what we do all committee meeting long, is that how do we write the most authentic characters with disabilities? And I think that there's something to be said for just embracing the practicality of things rather than trying to get at the larger philosophical things. Those things I think come later. But in just thinking like, well, how would a person do this? I mean, it's an exercise in empathy, in one sense, and I'm going to keep rounding back to that word over and over. But I mean, would you agree?
I completely agree, and I don't mean to denigrate my own process. I tend to be a little bit more modest than other people might be, so I tend to self-denigrate. But I mean, Edward was a metaphor for your community, but it was also a metaphor for every community and for every person on the planet. I believe every person on the planet feels misunderstood and feels like an outsider and feels like they don't belong and feels like they're not heard and feels, I mean, there may be exceptions. I was about to say feels like they don't have a voice, because God knows we've got public exceptions to that in 2020. But yes, it meant a lot to me to be thoroughgoing, and the only way I could be thoroughgoing was to go approach it in a really practical manner.
And when you were doing the screenplay, did you go in a linear fashion from page 1 to page 113, or was there a scene that you came up, even when you were doing the prose version, where you were like, aha, I got this?
I tend to write in sequence, every script. So, but I do, I mean, whenever I'm asked to do an adaptation or something like Nightmare Before Christmas, if I have a vision of what I can do with it, then I know I can say, yes, I feel comfortable doing that job. So that's kind of skipping ahead in my head. So for example, Sally in Nightmare, her design before I arrived on the scene involved being kind of a Frankenstein character where she's stitched together. And so images came to my head of her throwing herself from the tower and scattering and then sewing herself back together, which I thought was a great demonstration of her fearlessness and her resourcefulness, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'll skip ahead to an image or so, but in terms of execution, I've always been a, from page 1 to page whatever person, and I don't reread what I wrote the day before. I just keep going until I get to the end, which is every writer's joy, those 2 words, and then I'll go back.
And how long did it take you to write it?
Gosh, I don't remember, but it was a very quick time. So I wrote it when I was 30, and Tim was committed to, gosh, by the time I wrote it, I think he was shooting or in editing of Beetlejuice, and then he was committed to do Batman, and I had no idea if he was ever actually going to get to this project. So I sat around for the 4 years it took till Edward saw the light of celluloid, quite nervous about whether or not it would actually get made.
And was there any moment along the process, and I don't expect this to come from Tim Burton, but was there any moment along the way where the people that were seeing it and the people that were potentially going to make it with you were like, what are you doing?
Well, it was my show script for a few years there, and I did get an awful lot of, I mean, people always wanted to take a meeting with me because they thought, who is this person? But I did get a lot of skepticism from an awful lot of people in the business. So much so that the way Tim, and God bless him for having the power to be able to do this, the way we set up the project was that the studio, it was Fox, that the studio had no notes, no meetings, paying me minimally, no nothing until the Friday of whatever year we decided to turn it in. They had that weekend only to give it a green light on the Monday morning, or to put it in turnaround and let somebody else have the opportunity. And I don't think the film ever would have gotten made in it. I don't think the film would have survived. The script would not have survived the conventional development process, even as it was then. Certainly not today, but even as it was then. So we were really lucky. We had a deal the likes of which I've never had before or since or heard of anybody having.
Well, maybe somebody on our call right now can figure it out so that
Go for it.
this
Do
type
it.
of filmmaking can continue.
From your lips to the people who can say yes' ears.
And so you finished it, and when you and let me back up. You initially balked at Johnny Depp.
Well, I wouldn't say balked. Johnny Depp he was Winona's boyfriend. I mean, that's how I was told about him. Winona's boyfriend is gonna, maybe gonna play Edward Scissorhands. So that was a bit of an eye roller. I had never seen 21 Jump Street. I think that's what it's called. That he was in. I'd never met him. I didn't know anything about him. I wrote it with, I seldom write things with actors in mind, but I did have John Cusack in my mind for Edward and Laura Dern in my mind for Kim. But, as executed, I don't think anybody could have done a better job than either of them. Johnny was so devoted and so committed to handling all the hardship, because those hands were heavy. We were shooting in Florida where it was 100 million degrees. He was wearing, I think the suit was actually made of leather, if not leather, then some kind of latex. I mean, it was so hot there that I, in my, almost no clothes, whatever I could get, shift, had like heat rash so badly that when I got undressed one night, I looked in the mirror and I thought it said "help me" across my, emblazoned across my stomach, but by whatever creature was trying to get out into the cool air of the air conditioning. I mean, it was hot, and I don't know that Cusack, who was already a kind of a star, would have had the wherewithal to endure the hardships that Johnny did.
And when we had talked earlier, and again with the empathy thing, we talked about how you would feel if this were made today, especially given the diversity conversation going around, and the fight to have performers with disabilities actually playing those roles. And you brought up an interesting point about empathy and Johnny when he was being chased by the cops as Edward.
Remind me what I said.
That it was he did it so many times, and those scissors were so heavy that he threw up, but that he kept going.
Yes, well, I'm sure there are other occasions that were just as hard or harder for him, because at least that was shot at night. I mean, the difference between making that film then and making it now, just on a practical level, are that now the hands would have been CGI'd in. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And at that time, there was no option to do that. And the hands were a practical, do you call them a prop? I guess they're in the props department. But anyway, they were a practical effect. And so Johnny had those awkward and heavy and challenging hands put on his body every morning, and he kept them on all day long. He never wanted to have a relief from it. And it communicated his difficulties and his sadness and his pain and his challenges in a way that never could have been communicated if he had not been wearing these very difficult appendages. And I think that it inspires us as the audience to feel what the character is feeling, because he was Johnny laid himself bare to be that part, to be that character, that we enter into his wants and his needs and his difficulties, and so you can't help but be inspired to feel empathy for him.
And why do you think that the reactions of the townspeople, especially, I go back to the hell of a handshake moment, that's so spot on in terms of the way that the so-called able-bodied world. And I hate the phrase able-bodied because of the binary that it creates between me and the rest of the world, as I'm useless and they are not. I don't like it.
Yeah.
But their reactions to things, where did that just come? Like,
well, my brother had a very bad bicycle accident when he was 12 years old, in which he went arms first through a glass door and cut his right arm at the artery at the armpit, and lived because a kid in our neighborhood had basically had the same injury the year before, and all the well-meaning neighborhood people had tried to put a tourniquet on it. It's too high for a tourniquet. My dad, who I don't know how he knew what to do, but he literally put his hand in my brother's armpit and held the artery together for the 35 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive. My brother underwent surgery. They saved the appearance of the arm, but the arm never developed after that. He had something like, I don't know how many thousands of stitches, and he, to this day, he's now almost 70 years old, does not have use of his right arm, except to, the hand is a little bit frozen like this, and so he can put the handle of something, a paper bag or something in it, but that's literally, and he can move it a little bit, but that's pretty much the sum total of his ability to use it. And cruelly, the kids at the school that he attended locked him in the closet and called him Lobster Claw. That was a reality in my family. The horrible, or people would say, oh, to him, they'd say, oh, I didn't recognize you, but then I looked at your arm and I knew it was you. I mean, the sort of, the bald-faced lack of feeling that was often showed toward him was something very, very real. I was 8 years old when he had the accident. It was something very real in my life, and so I know that I carried feelings about that into writing about Edward at that suburban barbecue, and that was also part of the trajectory of the story of Edward is that the neighborhood is initially fascinated by his difference, and then they're bored by it, and then they're threatened by it. And so difference, yay, oh my God, it's not so different anymore because we're used to it. And then difference, oh my God, it's so scary, difference. And that barbecue kind of takes place in the, is it a parabola? I don't know geometry, but in the parabola of the shift from fascination to threat through that sort of, like lack of interest part. And anyway, so that was a very sort of vivid, and you're right, it was a real turning point and a very vivid moment in the storytelling, in the character's experience of his new world, and so forth.
Okay, I wanted to ask a little bit of a deep water question. When Anthony Michael Hall is murdered at the end,
Mm-hmm.
as a 10-year-old, I was.
You mean
like,
commit suicide at the end?
Okay. But when that happens, as a 10-year-old, I was like, yeah, get him. But having grown up, and certainly having gone through what everybody's going through in this country, where mass shootings are, come with the morning coffee. How do you feel about it now, given that your outsider does that?
Well, my outsider did it because he was protecting someone he loved. He didn't aggressively go to kill the Jim character. The Jim character came aggressively at him and got impaled on Edward's hands. So I think of it as Jim's just desserts. And I think of it as whatever intolerant twist is going on in Jim's mind caused that accident, essentially, himself.
And do you think, though, that in a way that and to round back to the whole fairy tale aspect, that in a way that's how it must end, that Edward can't stay out in...
I felt that way very strongly, that he's a character that he's cursed by what many people want, which is he's cursed by immortality. He can't age. So given that, and that was very important to me. I don't know why, but anyway, it was very important to me in the storytelling. Given that's the case, that he had to retreat back to his safety place in order to survive. And Kim understood that by saying they killed each other and holding up one of the spare scissor arms. And Jim never would have given up if Edward had simply retreated. So Jim, I had to get rid of Jim. I mean, again, storytelling is kind of practical, as you well know, Michael. But it also fit it felt right. It fit. It was the proper outcome for the fairy tale.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for a little while. But to bring it into real life and to certainly connect it to my own experience, thank God, how do we keep the Edwards of the world out of the castle and with the rest of us? How can we foster that?
God, I wish I knew. I think that the more stories that are told about the Edwards, the goal is to nurture empathy, and the more empathy we have as a culture, even if it's got to be organized compassion. I mean, I don't believe people are born very compassionate. I think we have to be trained to be thoughtful. I'm that person in the room in every meeting I go to where I demand that doors are held open and that people stand up when people come into the room, that, pay attention. We're not, it's not all about you. Wake up. Everyone is here. And I think, the more stories are told, wake up, everyone is here, not just about people with overt disabilities, but people with covert disabilities, people with different color skin, people of a different gender, compassion. I have a granddaughter through marriage, and whenever she comes to visit, we do a project, and it used to be, can't now in the time of COVID, but it used to be that we would make sandwiches and take them to a place in a local city here where a lot of homeless people find themselves congregating, and we would pass out food and water and talk to people and let this child know that she, in her privilege, has a responsibility to pay attention to those who are less fortunate than she. And I just think, if we can each do our part in waking those around us up to, I'm alive, you're alive, I have feelings, you have feelings. I mean, we're all here. That's all I know.
Well, on that note, I'd like to turn it over to the audience so we can turn on the microphones and the cameras, and please step into the light and say hello to Caroline.
Hey everyone, so if you'd like to ask a question, you can use the Zoom raise hand feature that can be found if you click on participants. It'll open up a side panel, and at the bottom of that list there is a button that says raise hand. Thanks.
There we
Great.
go.
Hi, Glenn. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being here. This film to me is one of the most perfect expressions of the word ache that I've ever seen, and it became apparent from the first image, the first note of one of the most beautiful soundtracks I've ever heard. It kind of everything came together for me for this to be from beginning to end that expression, and I'm wondering, as the writer of a film directed by someone with such a singular vision that is inimitable, and you see it in everything that he does. You know it's a Tim Burton directed film when you see it. Is there anything that came out in this film exactly how you had it in your head? Because sometimes it gets taken away from the writer where it's like, gosh, that's not what I would have done. Is there one moment or anything that comes to mind for you?
You know what? I can honestly and happily say that there isn't. This is the 30th anniversary of the release of Edward Scissorhands come December, and so I've been doing, in a time of Zoom, people want to talk to people like me, which is hilarious. But anyway, so somebody was reading me the script from the film, and literally, at least of the section he was reading, and actually I know that it's true, basically Tim shot the script as written, shot by shot. I mean, our sensibilities meshed that completely. I'm actually, I don't know if you're a writer also, Glenn, but I'm a pretty cunning writer in that I don't believe in giving stage directions because I think directors resent that because they feel like they're being told what to do. But so rather than offend them, I manipulate them. So what I want a director to pay attention to, I will put all in caps and on its own line. And then I will go on, like, I can't even give you an example, but just like an image, like say the flower. And then I'll write about the flower in the next paragraph. And I always make my paragraphs short. I try to be very user-friendly writing a script because the first experience of a script is a reading experience. So I try to be very emphatic about how the reader is reading it. So you said something earlier in your question that I wanted to answer. Now I'm having a brain fart on it. What did you say earlier? Oh, ache. Okay. So here's the other thing that's unique about this film in my experience is that every single person was making the same movie. And that is a very, very, it sounds sort of like why wouldn't they be? But it's a very, very unusual thing to happen. Tonally, spirit, the spirit of the film, everybody was making the same movie, and the tone of this movie was pretty evanescent. It's hard to put your finger on what's the tone of this movie. Whimsical maybe comes to mind, but what is the tone? But everybody got it, from the costumer to the production designer to Tim, of course, and Danny. I mean, without Danny's beautiful score, my mom, who I think she liked the movie, but she loved that score. She played the score all day, every day, for the rest of her life. It is a really beautiful thing, and Danny, I think it's his most beautiful score, and he really captured, and everybody captured it. It was my first experience, so I foolishly presumed every filmmaking experience would be as wonderful, and I'm here to report that it's not true.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Glenn. Nice to see you.
Anyone else?
Diego.
Hi, Diego. We're going to head and ask you to unmute.
Hi, Diego.
Hi, Caroline. How are you? Nice
I'm
to
well.
meet you.
Oh my God, look at all your Disney characters over there.
Yeah, I'm a big Disney fan. First of all, I want to say nice to meet you.
You too, Diego.
I'm actually an animator, but I also want to get into screenwriting.
Uh-huh.
And oh my God, my brother's been begging me to watch this movie for a long time. So I finally watched it today, and oh my God.
Is it your first time seeing it?
Oh, I
Yes.
envy you.
Oh, that's so cool. Did you cry?
A little bit, yes. I'm not a big crier.
Did you laugh at the beginning?
Yes, I love the the neighborhood, everything about it, I could relate a lot because I'm a quadriplegic. When they were feeding him, to like when they're shaking their hands, that happens to me a lot. People come up to me and they want to shake my hand, and well, obviously I can't give them my hand. So I could relate in that. But anyways, I wanted to ask you, based on screenwriting, I want to start writing, and it's funny because I know that you just shared that you guys based off the idea of drawing. So is it true that like when you have a character in mind, like the rest of the story comes easily?
Well, I wish that were the case. In the case of Edward, as I think I said, it was sort of like, it was like, have you ever heard the story about Athena being born from the head of Zeus? You know, the goddess was born from the head of the god. Well, that's what Edward felt like to me. It just came out like whole, done. You know, like inspiration, execution, how to see, you know, it all just came, it's never happened to me before or since. But I do believe, I mean, as a writer and a screenwriter, I write character. I don't write, plot comes from character, not the other way around. And so to me, understanding, knowing, developing, thinking about how a person, or i.e. a character, and often in my case it's an animal, would react in any given situation, then gives expression to that situation and makes other situations arise. So yes, character is crucial to me in developing a story.
I think I was invited back in.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi, good to see you again. Thank you so much for this conversation, and of course the film.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And Michael. So from this discussion, and of course I just did see the film again, the story itself is less a parable about disability inclusion than it is a critique, really, of suburbia and these cookie cutter houses, and the husbands all come home at 6 o'clock and the wives, this image of standardization and the outsider. Can you talk a little more about that from this context? We're about to have a conversation in an hour in this film festival about race and disability and inclusion. So talk more broadly, if you will, about the outsider and what that meant to you about this representation of suburbia.
Well, both Tim and I grew up in suburbia and were fascinated by suburbia and found suburbia on the surface such a beautiful place and such a safe and beautiful and polished concept. But the ugly underbelly came out in both the suburbia he grew up in and the suburbia I grew up in. That's what fascinated us. So that but the companion piece to that is that I always felt sorry for my dad going off to work, because life happened in the kitchen as far as I was concerned. All life happened in the house, and like, poor guy, he had to go off doing battle with his briefcase, and he only got to come home when he'd finished doing battle. And so I felt sorry for him. So the standardization of life, I was playing with the concept of it. I grew up in a neighborhood that was mostly older people and older houses, and every house was different and all the people were different. And my friend grew up in a suburban development, the one that I based the development of Edward Scissorhands on. And I didn't, when I first saw that development, did not see the sort of the horror of, Model A has the front door on the left of the house, Model B has the front door on the right of the house, and it's just a mishmash of those the houses all are the same, essentially. But her life and her neighborhood was so much more fun and engaging than the life in my neighborhood. It was all families and kids, and the moms would come out, on their lawn chairs and probably have their cocktails while the kids were playing football in the street. And I had such suburbia envy about her life only to sort of, as I grew up, to sort of realize the stultification that was undoubtedly taking place there. So that was what interested me about all that, and was what I, always have tried to escape from, that the stultification of expectation and rigidity.
And with that, I'm going to let you know that we have 5 more minutes.
Okay. Have to take my director hat off right now and address you as completely and entirely myself. For the first 10 years of my life, I had surgery after surgery. And in between that, I was bullied a whole lot. And by the time December 7th, 1990 rolled around, and they had just put through the ADA, the same year, where finally I was given rights to personhood in many ways, I wanted to die. And I don't mean that in a suicidal way, because I've never been that. But I just thought that there was no way that a guy like me, with the experience that I had, that this could possibly continue for anybody. But then I begged my parents to take me to this movie at the Spring Valley Marketplace in New York. And when it was over, we stayed through the whole credits, and when my dad turned to me, because I think he was a bit curious why we had not left the theater, I burst into tears. That moment changed my entire life, because what you did with that one movie was you created a harbor and you created a horizon. And it reverberated every single day from that moment on to this one. And so when I tell you that this film festival would not exist without you, and I mean, it could have existed because someone else could have thought of it, and they could have pulled that off. But the way that it exists now, and with the people whom I absolutely love and who defend my right to personhood on a daily basis for me and for so many others, this film festival belongs to you as much as anybody else. So on behalf of ReelAbilities International, on behalf of my parents, and on behalf of our audience, and on behalf of myself, thank you for giving me that reason over and over, day after day. Thank you for Edward Scissorhands, and thank you for you.
Thank you for saying so. Thank you so much.
And you are welcome anytime on our particular island of misfit toys, anytime you like.
Please invite me. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
And I hope that we get to stay in touch.
I do too, Michael. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
And could you light up all those mics for me, please? Every single one of them. One more thing.
Hey, everyone, you can go ahead and unmute your mics.
Would you do me the kindness of applauding this remarkable woman and her work?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
I'll see you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.